when you do a daily podcast and video like this, Monday through Friday, every day you're talking about stuff, you tend to rely on the topics of the day. Like I generally in the week kind of plot out what we might do on the old legal pad, what Monday might be, what Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Obviously Friday's the mailbag, but you kind of let the news sort of dictate. And so when there's a topic or something that comes up, you adjust. You might have had something planned for your Tuesday podcast or your Thursday or whatever the day may be, but then you adjust when there's news. And it's good when that happens, when there's some kind of news that breaks, and then you can sort of adjust your schedule, and now you've got an extra day of content sort of built in there, and it's great. You respond to the news that happens. But sometimes there's news that happens, and I got to tell you, just not quite ready to talk about it on a podcast. So if you're on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, you know what I'm talking about. Put up a pretty long post yesterday, breaking down some info and information. How about that? You know how I'm a writer, because I've got such a wide vocabulary. I've got a vocabulary that is broad and wide. When I'm talking about info and information, but put a lot of information, a lot of thoughts on kind of where things stand at the top of Pitt's athletic department. So I highly recommend you go check that out. Not quite ready to talk about it here on the podcast. I suspect there'll be a time in the very near future, maybe tomorrow, maybe Friday, maybe next week, we will talk about some things. But for now, it's just on the message boards. That's where we're having those conversations. I put up a long post. You should go check that out if you haven't. And there's a lot of comments and responses to it. Pretty interesting conversation with a lot of insight, I think, from a lot of Pitt fans on the topic of athletic department leadership. So I highly recommend you go check that out. Today, we're going to keep our focus on football. We're going to keep talking about football on the midweek edition of the Morning Pitt. I got defensive players, young defensive players you need to be keeping an eye on in Saturday's game. Guys that are definitely going to get on the field against Kent State in the season opener, and guys that we are very interested to see and curious to see as that game gets going. There'll probably be players that Pitt is counting on all season long, but it's a handful of guys. I got about 9 or 10, maybe 8, depending on how many I actually want to talk about. Young defensive players who are going to be making, if not their debut in a prominent role this weekend. So defensive players to watch, young defensive players to watch here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Wednesday. It's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Glad you could tune in for this one. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of Pitt conversation going on. Let's just talk a little football here today. We talked the quarterback situation a lot yesterday, so we don't need to dive in on that one again. But we are going to talk a little bit about defense, what's going on the other side of the ball, and some young defensive players to keep an eye on. Now, we've certainly talked a lot about these guys throughout training camp. We talk about these guys a lot on Panther-Lair.com. These videos right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, if you've been watching them, you certainly are aware of some of these guys, all these guys probably. And if you've been reading our coverage at Panther-Lair.com, you're well aware of them as well. If you're not following all our videos here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and you're not reading all of our content at Panther-Lair.com, I think you're missing out on some of the best Pitt coverage that you're going to find. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You'll never miss any of our Pitt video content. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our press conferences, interviews, all those kinds of things, plus our weekly live show like we'll do tonight on Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Our post-game show that we'll have after the Kent State game. I'm guessing probably 6:30, 7 o'clock, somewhere around there. We'll get out of the game, get a little bite to eat, and then sit down and start drinking, start talking about Pitt football. That's always fun to do, those post-game shows, so hopefully you can tune in for that. And then the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. So make sure you check out the site, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, there's a couple of freshmen who I think are going to be in the mix here this weekend. We're going to see them on the field on Saturday, I believe. And they're going to be guys that we're going to be keeping an eye out for. I think there's 2 freshmen who made the depth chart. I just want to check because I feel like there was another one. No, I guess there's just 2. 2 true freshmen who ended up on the 2 deep. for Pitt this season, the official two deep, and I don't think that's just a ceremonial listing. I believe those guys are actually going to see the field quite a bit, and they're both on the defensive line. Francis Brew, the defensive tackle, and Sincere Edwards, the defensive end. Now, Pat Narduzzi has told the story a couple times about Francis Brew. I think it was last week in training camp. It was the final week of camp. The coaches started segueing into more of a game prep mode, and so they started assigning guys to the scout team. And as a policy, according to Pat Narduzzi, they put every freshman on the scout team for the first day of scout team work. Everybody goes there. And according to Narduzzi, the first day of this, the offensive linemen at Pitt were saying, well, this guy Francis Brew is not going to be staying down here very long. This guy's not going to be on the scout team very long. And he wasn't. He's not on the scout team. He's on the two deep. He's listed as an or starter, a defensive tackle, along with Nakai Johnson and Anthony Johnson. A little bit of a Johnson sandwich with the Brew in the middle. And I think Francis Brew is going to be in the middle of Pitt's defensive line on Saturday a whole lot. I think you're going to see him out there. The key with Francis Brew, as you watch him play, is his strength and what he's able to do power-wise. I'm going to bring up the roster just so I have the jersey numbers. I should have had this already in front of me, but that's okay. Francis Brew, defensive tackle. He's still wearing 95, actually. A lot of guys changed their numbers. I think 11 newcomers, either freshmen or transfers, changed their jersey numbers. Francis Brew is not one of them. So number 95 will be out there for your viewing pleasure. And I think it's going to be fun to watch, see how he uses his strength, and see if he can be disruptive up the middle. I mean, like we talk so much about the defensive line this offseason. We talk about the need for playmakers on the defensive line. That's especially true. Well, it's especially true at end and tackle, but it's certainly true at defensive tackle where they didn't have a playmaker last year. They didn't have anybody who was getting into the backfield and creating pressure, making plays behind the line of scrimmage. We'll see if Francis Brew can be in that mix. I think Isaiah Neal is going to be maybe the playmaker in that group. I think Sean Fitzsimmons has a chance to do that as well once he gets healthy. But Francis Brew is really intriguing as a young guy where he just might be able to use his strength, which is impressive. It's like the strength of an upperclassman to win some battles up front and make some plays. The other freshman on the defensive line is Sincere Edwards. He's playing at defensive end. He made the two deep at defensive end. He's listed as the backup. As an or backup behind Nate Matlack. It's Nate Matlack on the first team, and then behind him, Sincere Edwards or redshirt freshman Maverick Grazio. And I think it's been clear Edwards, number 90, who's been here since spring camp, been here since January and participated in spring camp, I should say. I think it's been clear that he is going to be on the field this season. The coaches said as much in the spring. He, obviously benefited from enrolling early. He was one of the top-ranked recruits in Pitt's 2024 recruiting class, so he came in with a high pedigree, and I think he more or less has lived up to the expectations. Now, Pitt doesn't have a lot of numbers on the defensive line, and particularly at defensive end. Their numbers are low, and so that there's an element, too, of that. If you have some depth with some upperclassmen, maybe a guy like Francis Brew doesn't make the two deep at defensive tackle. If you have some depth and some upperclassmen, maybe Sincere Edwards doesn't make the two deep at defensive end. But that kind of doesn't matter because they have the depth that they have and the upperclassmen and underclassmen that they have, and Brew and Edwards are among the best out of that group. And so they're going to play, and they're going to play a lot. Sincere Edwards is a unique-looking guy. I'm curious to see what he looks like on the field. Number 90, like I say, if you want to keep an eye on his jersey number, but he's not a big guy. If you saw that hit we did with the ACC network a couple of weeks ago, Tom Luganbill from ESPN, ESPN does a lot of recruiting coverage for ESPN, said that he thought Sincere Edwards would be a defensive tackle because he's sort of built like that kind of three-technique defensive tackle. But he's going to play defensive end. That's where he's lining up. That's where he's been practicing. And that's where he's going to get on the field. It's where he's listed on the depth chart. And so I think he's going to look a little bit smaller out there, particularly in comparison to like Nate Matlack, who's a starter at defensive end and quite a bit taller than Edwards. I think he's going to look a little bit shorter, but I think he's going to be able to make an impact. You never want to count too much on freshmen. You certainly don't want to sit back and say, well, if they can get this out of Sincere Edwards, I don't know what you're going to get out of Sincere Edwards. I don't know what you're going to get out of a true freshman. But I think he's got the pedigree, the ability, the talent to make an impact. And this game should be a great opportunity. Kent State actually returns like pretty much their entire starting offensive line. But it's a starting offensive line from one of the worst offenses in college football last year. So is it good or bad to bring those guys back, right? But they are players who are going to be experienced, and Sincere Edwards and Francis Brew, for that matter, out there playing for the first time. They're going to have some challenges in terms of going against older, more experienced players, but they're going to bring their talent and their youthful exuberance. We'll see which one wins out in that regard, but I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. In this game overall, like as we talk about young players to watch, young guys we're interested in seeing, this game overall should be one that Pitt wins comfortably, right? Like we said, I think yesterday we talked about the line being 24.5 with an over-under of 54 or 55, somewhere around there. I don't know if Pitt's going to cover 24.5. I don't know if the over is going to hit on 54 or 55, but I think they should win by several touchdowns and win rather comfortably, which means guys like Edwards and Brew and some of the other young defensive players we're talking about here are going to get their opportunities, and they'll have an opportunity to fail because the game should not really be all that close. So they can go out there, they can just play and see what they're able to do, and if they fail, they fail, but it shouldn't necessarily mean the game. Like, a week from now when they play at Cincinnati or 2 weeks from now when they host West Virginia, there you're going to be a little bit more particular about when you use those young players because you don't want to jeopardize the game. This Saturday, they should not be in position to jeopardize the game, which means they should be in position to get a lot of opportunities for those young defensive linemen. And I'm looking forward to seeing it for sure. All right, elsewhere on the defensive line. And this guy's a little bit older. I tried to, as I made this list of young defensive players to watch for, I tried to stick to the freshmen and redshirt freshmen. Jimmy Scott is a redshirt sophomore, but he's a guy that I mentioned, I think last week I did an episode like players we're not talking about enough or something like that. Starting defensive end, going to be his first real live action. He played some last year, but not a ton. Certainly wasn't a starter, wasn't getting starter reps, but he's getting starter reps now, and he's going to get starter reps in the season. And I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. He's a young guy, been waiting in the wings for just 2 years, not a ton of time, but waiting in the wings for a couple of years. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what he's able to do when he gets on the field. Number 44, defensive end, Jimmy Scott. I don't think he changed his number. I should double check that. Nope, he's still sporting 44. And shout out to him. He came in for an interview with the media yesterday, and he was wearing a sweatshirt that said 44. So, because I didn't recognize him. I don't think I've seen him without a helmet on since he was a high school recruit coming out of upstate New York, or coming out of Buffalo area. And I haven't seen him without a helmet on since then. So he walked in, I'm like, pretty sure that's Jimmy Scott. Don't think that's Adam Howinitz, but the other 44 on the team. I think Howinitz is the 44. The tight end from Valley View, Adam Howinitz. Nope, it wasn't him. It was Jimmy Scott, defensive end, who's going to be a starter, play a lot, and his individual success is going to have a lot to do with this defense's success. I really think that when you have a year like this, I think some of the individual guys are really highlighted. It's Jimmy Scott, it's Nate Matlack in particular. It's Rylan Gandy. It's Rashad Battle in particular at corner. It's these outside linebackers. Some of these guys are really going to be highlighted when they're thrust into action for the first time, and the defense is counting on them to make plays. And so I think Jimmy Scott's going to be an interesting guy to watch. At linebacker, it's pretty much all of them. In terms of young guys to watch, it's pretty much all outside of the middle linebackers, outside of Brandon George and Key Thompson. Everybody else is going to be really, really interesting to see because it's all... there's 3 sophomores and a redshirt sophomore. So eligibility-wise, it's 4 sophomores. And experience-wise, they're all right around the same level. Some varying degrees in there, but they're all right around the same level. I can't wait. I'm really excited to see those guys go out and play. Randy Bates, the defensive coordinator, said it yesterday. He feels like they have guys who can make plays. And he was talking, I think, more about the defensive line, but about the defense as a whole. That one big thing this year is that they feel like they've got guys who can make plays. And I think that's as true at linebacker as any other position on this defense. Maybe safety. But I think they've got guys who can make plays. And it's especially the case at outside linebacker. Kyle Lewis is going to make plays. Rasheem Biles is going to make plays. Braylon Lovelace, Jordan Bass. These guys are going to make plays. Cam Lindsey, if he gets in there, will make plays. I really believe that. I'm that high on this linebacker group. Again, I've been saying it all summer. If you thought I was going to learn my lesson from overhyping outside linebackers last year, you were wrong, and you'll continue to be wrong. It's just like if, Amsal Delilich is not great this season, I will not learn my lesson about overhyping 6'7" Bosnian wings who can shoot. I'm not going to learn it. I'm going to keep doing it because that's what I do. But I digress. These outside linebackers I think are really exciting. Young players, athletic players, fast, playmaking ability. And I think it's going to be fun to watch them. Jersey number wise, I think Braylon Lovelace is wearing 1 now. That's weird. Or not 1, 0, because 1 is retired. Kyle Lewis changed his number. He's now wearing number 9. Jordan Bass is wearing 20, and Rasheem Biles is still wearing 31. So 9 is, I would guess 9 and 0. Lewis and Lovelace will be the starters, but it could be Biles instead of Lovelace. And then, Jordan Bass, number 20, coming off the bench. And then whichever of those other guys, Biles or Lovelace, whichever one doesn't start, will come off the bench. So those are the guys to keep an eye on at linebacker. At corner, I think the guy to keep an eye on is number 10, Rylan Gandy. He's been their number 1 corner all through spring and all through training camp. I think he's the guy who's really positioned to sort of take the mantle of the next really good Pitt cornerback in this defensive system. He's a guy that has been waiting his turn for a long time, waiting patiently. And you know what? He's not a young guy, but throw in Rashad Battle as well. I think, you got 2 guys there, and Gandy's a redshirt sophomore, I think. Battle is a senior or redshirt senior. He's getting up in age. I think he might be a redshirt senior this year. But both of those guys haven't played a lot. You know what I mean? Like, Battle played some when he wasn't hurt over the last few years. Gandy played a little bit last year, maybe got 100 snaps, probably a little less than that. But they're really going to be seeing their first extended action starter reps this season and on Saturday. And so watching those guys to see how they play, I think is going to be one of the there are a lot of areas I'm really interested to watch with this defense this year. The line, obviously, the outside linebackers, the safeties, because I think they're going to be really fun to watch. I think they're going to make a lot of plays. And then the corners, because you have a new group. So I just basically named every position. That's good football analysis. The position I'm most interested to watch on defense this year is every position. Right? Come on. But you understand what I'm saying. Maybe that's the overriding point in all of this, because I have a safety I'm going to mention too, and you can probably, I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count of who that's going to be. But maybe that's the point in all of this, is that their defense is really positioned to be really interesting this year. Based on the guys who are going to be available, based on the guys who are going to play, based on the guys who are going to be in prominent roles for the first time. I just think it's a really fascinating defense to watch. It's like safeties you saw a lot of last year, and a bunch of guys you haven't seen hardly any of. Like Brandon George is the guy that you've seen the most of out of the rest of the players on this defense. And even he has never started a game in his Pitt career. So, I think there's just a lot of intrigue with this defense as a whole. And it extends to the corners and extends back to the safeties. Not with Donovan McMillan, not with Javon McIntyre, maybe a little with P.J. O'Brien, because I talked about him last week. Like I said, he's probably a guy we're not talking about enough. But Cruz Brookins. Cruz Brookins, for the hype that Cruz Brookins has gotten this offseason, if he doesn't have 2 interceptions against Kent State, it'll be a disappointment. Seriously, Cruz Brookins has been the most hyped player this offseason by the Pitt coaches, by the Pitt players, by us, the media, who are regurgitating all the things the coaches and the players say, and obviously, some of the things we observe and hear off the record. It's all about Cruz Brookins and how good he's going to be, how good he was in the spring, how good he was in training camp, and how good he's going to be this season. He's going to be on the field a lot. He's going to be rotating in there with Javon McIntyre and Donovan McMillan and P.J. O'Brien. He can play the field safety or the boundary safety spot. And it's, I think it's like, it is written in stone that Cruz Brookins will make plays. And if you want to make a little clip out of that and throw it back in my face when he has, finishes the season with 12 tackles and no turnovers and all that, that's fine. I'm not going to run away from it. It's just, there's been so much hype this offseason Cruz Brookins has to be one of those guys who steps up and makes plays this year. If you're talking about a young guy to watch, keep an eye out for, let me double check his number, because he changed it too. Number 12. They gave him Tino Sinceri's number. Cruz Brookins, safety. Keep an eye out for him. So that's a handful of guys I'm excited to see on Saturday. I think you're probably excited to see them as well. There's pretty much this whole defense we're excited to see. And certainly those guys in particular are going to be fun to watch. I'm looking forward to it. And I think you probably are too. All right, listen, make sure you get your questions in for the mailbag edition of the Morning Pit. The mailbag goes on Friday, so you need to post your questions now. Do it at Panther-Lair.com. We've got a thread on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board where you can post your questions. We'll answer as many as we can. But you got to be a premium subscriber. Go to the message boards, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Post your question there in the mailbag thread. And we appreciate it. Make sure you like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Don't forget the live show tonight, 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett will be here talking Pitt sports with you. So make sure you tune in for that. I can't wait. Definitely looking forward to it. Those are always fun. And I suspect we'll have a lively conversation this evening. So tune in right here at YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, 8:30 p.m. tonight. Like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And yeah, have a great Wednesday. It's been a heck of a week so far, and it's only going to get more interesting, I think, leading up to game day on Saturday. So enjoy your Wednesday. We'll catch up with you tonight for the live stream, tomorrow for the Morning Pit, right here, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.